All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're unpacking an incredibly emotional twist on a classic mythological epic. We're breaking down the source material that inspired Madeline Miller's The Song of Achilles. Now look, this isn't just your standard run-through of ancient battles and giant heroes in bronze armor. This explainer dives deep into a story about inescapable destiny, profound friendship, and absolutely devastating loss. It basically takes the legend of the literal strongest warrior in Greek history and flips the camera around. We aren't just focusing on Achilles anymore. We're looking through the eyes of Patroclus, the boy who loved him.
What if the greatest warrior in history was remembered not for war, but for love? It's a massive question, right? And it's such a brilliant hook because it completely turns the traditional warrior narrative on its head. Suddenly we're talking about a bond that acts as a force stronger than kingdoms, stronger than prophecy, and, as we'll see, maybe even stronger than death itself.
Section 1. The Exiled Prince. Now, what's really interesting about this comparison is that our story begins with a kid who is definitely not your typical hero. Patroclus is weak, he's awkward, and he is just deeply, deeply human. After a fatal childhood mistake, he's totally stripped of his honor and exiled in disgrace to the court of King Peleus. And that's where we get this undeniable, almost jarring contrast. On one hand, you've got this vulnerable, outcast boy. On the other, you have the king's son, Achilles. Beautiful, confident, and practically glowing with divine destiny. I mean, Achilles shines brighter than everyone else because his mom isn't just some queen. She's Thetis, a terrifying sea goddess. But here's the wild part. Against all odds, Achilles doesn't mock the exiled boy. He actually notices Patroclus. He befriends him. He makes him feel truly seen for the very first time in his life.
Section 2. A love-defying fate.
So as these two grow up, their friendship naturally evolves into a really profound romantic love. There are no huge dramatic confessions, it just grows steadily through deep trust, loyalty, and quiet understanding. Achilles constantly chooses Patroclus over his royal duties. But as you can imagine, this does not sit well with everyone. Achilles' terrifying sea goddess mother, Thetis, she absolutely despises Patroclus. To her, he's weak, he's unworthy, and he's a huge distraction from her son's glorious future. And that future is entirely bound by the prophecy of Achilles. This is an inescapable destiny with only two options. He can either live a long, peaceful life but be completely forgotten by history, or he can live a very short life crowned with eternal glory. It creates this impossible, crushing tension for Achilles. He's caught right between this pure love he's found and the eternal fame the gods are demanding of him.
To kind of escape the crushing weight of all these kingdoms and prophecies, the boys head off to train under the wise centaur Chiron. And during this really peaceful, almost dreamlike time away from the rest of the world, their paths diverge in the most perfect way. Patroclus becomes the healer. He dives into medicine, nature, philosophy, really focusing on deep compassion. Achilles, meanwhile, evolves into the weapon, developing combat skills unlike anything the world has literally ever seen. The absolutely crucial point to take away from this is how Patroclus grounds Achilles. While the rest of the world looks at Achilles and sees nothing but an invincible weapon, Patroclus sees the gentle boy underneath it all.
Section 3. The Brutality of War. Well, that dreamlike peace is completely shattered the second Helen of Sparta is taken to Troy. The Greek kings unite, and a terrifying prophecy drops a grim truth on them. Greece literally cannot win this war without Achilles. But if Achilles fights, he never returns home alive. Knowing this perfectly well, Achilles still chooses glory. And Patroclus, he chooses to stay right by his side. Once they hit the beaches of Troy, the absolutely horrifying, corrupting reality of the conflict sets in. We're talking about men killing for pride, kings sacrificing innocence, and power just completely destroying any sense of morality. You see this perfectly embodied in arrogant commanders like Agamemnon, who care way more about military victory than human life. And as Achilles starts racking up these legendary victories, and his glory rises to terrifying heights, Patroclus stays totally untouched by the corruption. He spends his days putting his training from Chiron to use, healing wounded soldiers and protecting the innocent. It's this incredible, stark contrast of compassion right in the middle of absolute cruelty.
Section 4. Pride and devastating tragedy. So this simmering tension finally boils over when Commander Agamemnon publicly insults Achilles, and this kicks off a desperate, really fateful chain of events. First, a furious Achilles lets his pride just completely override his morality. He refuses to fight. He just sits in his tent, stubbornly watching countless Greek allies die. Second, Patroclus, who is just desperate to stop the senseless slaughter, begs for permission to wear Achilles' legendary armor into battle. He figures if he looks like Achilles, maybe he can scare the Trojans into retreating. And miraculously, it works. Patroclus hits the battlefield, inspires the Greeks, and saves a ton of innocent lives. But then, we hit the fatal turn. In all the chaotic adrenaline of the battlefield, Patroclus pushes too far. He puts himself directly in the crosshairs of Troy's greatest prince and warrior, Hector.
Hector kills Patroclus. Everything changes. It's in this specific, agonizing moment that the strongest warrior alive is completely shattered. Achilles doesn't just lose a brother in arms out there in the dirt, he loses his anchor. He loses the only person he truly loved in the world, the one thing tying him to his own humanity. And the grief becomes entirely unbearable.
What happens next is just a brutal, tragic freefall. Day one, Achilles' grief twists into this monstrous, terrifying need for revenge. He doesn't care about glory anymore. Entire armies are practically paralyzed by his empty, hollow fury. Day two, he hunts Hector down outside the walls of Troy and brutally kills him. But here's the thing, it's a totally empty victory because Patroclus is still gone. Without him, none of the glory or the prophecies mean a thing. And then finally, weeks later, that inescapable destiny comes knocking. Paris of Troy fires an arrow, guided by a god, and strikes Achilles. The greatest warrior in Greece finally falls.
Section 5. Reunion Beyond Death.
But you know what? The tragedy doesn't actually end on the battlefield. In the absolutely agonizing aftermath, Achilles' son cruelly refuses to let Patroclus' ashes be buried with Achilles. He stubbornly enforces society's rejection of their love, even in death. Because of this, Patroclus' spirit is left trapped and wandering. Empires fall, years pass, and Patroclus just waits, separated from the person he loves most. But eventually, we do get a cathartic release. Thetis, Achilles' cold, divine mother, the one who despised Patroclus' entire life, she finally gets it. She finally understands the profound depth of their connection. In a final, surprising act of grace, she carves Patroclus' name right there beside Achilles on the tomb. At last, the soulmates are reunited, not as a weapon and a side chick, but as equals, finally finding that eternal peace together that the living world constantly denied them.
Which brings us to the absolute core of this explainer. Would Achilles still choose glory if he knew it meant losing Patroclus forever? It's a question that strips away all the gold and the myth, leaving us with a story that is just breathtakingly human. It forces us to look at the true cost of fate, the devastating consequences of pride, and ultimately the unyielding power of love. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this fascinating narrative. Keep turning these ideas over in your mind, and remember that even the most ancient, larger-than-life legends are built on incredibly human choices.